Sometimes I wonder, I hope that he wasn't scared, that it all happened pretty quickly for him.
At 78, Annie Denver is finally breaking her silence about her late husband, John Denver, decades after his untimely passing. Fans of the legendary singer have long speculated about the private life of the man, whose songs became the soundtrack of a generation. Now, Annie offers a rare glimpse into their life together, revealing the love, struggles, and complexities behind the fame. Annie's reflections go beyond the public persona of John Denver. She recalls the highs of life in the spotlight, the joy of shared successes, and the moments of pure connection that made their relationship unique. But she also speaks candidly about the challenges long tours, the pressures of stardom, and the personal struggles that often remained hidden from the public eye. These revelations shed light on a side of John Denver that few ever saw. The man who loved deeply, struggled quietly, and faced the immense demands of fame while trying to maintain a normal family life. For Annie, breaking her silence is not about airing grievances or reliving pain, it's about honoring the truth of their shared journey. She shares stories of love, laughter, and resilience, reminding fans that even iconic figures are human, with complexities and vulnerabilities that exist behind the music. Her words offer insight into the emotional landscape of their marriage and the ways in which John's career both inspired and challenged their life together. This is more than just a story of fame. It's a story of enduring love, reflection, and the courage to share one's truth after decades of silence. At 78, Annie Denver invites the world to see John Denver not only as a musical legend, but as the husband she knew intimately, giving fans a heartfelt, deeply personal perspective on a life that captivated millions. Annie Denver, now 78, has lived much of her life in the shadow of one of the world's most beloved singers, John Denver. To the public, he was the voice behind timeless classics like Take Me Home, Country Roads, and Rocky Mountain High, a figure who seemed larger than life. To Annie, he was more than a legend. He was a husband, a partner, and the center of a deeply personal story that the world had only glimpsed in fragments. Decades after his tragic passing in 1997, Annie is finally sharing her memories, offering fans a rare and intimate view of their life together. Their marriage was a complex blend of love, passion, and challenge. From the outside, it might have seemed idyllic, a beautiful couple, successful careers, and a life surrounded by fame and privilege. But the reality, as Annie reveals, was more layered. The demands of John's career often meant long periods apart, with constant tours, recordings, and media appearances pulling him away from the quiet life of home. Annie remembers nights when she would sit alone in their house, listening to his music echoing through the halls, a bittersweet reminder of both his talent and his absence. Yet, despite the strains, there was undeniable love. Annie recalls moments of shared laughter in the kitchen, quiet hikes through the mountains, and evenings spent discussing dreams and fears, simple yet profound experiences that defined their bond. These private moments, hidden from the public eye, were the foundation of their relationship. Annie explains that while fans adored the songs, they could never truly know the man who stood beside her, the man whose warmth, humor, and vulnerability she cherished every day. Annie also speaks candidly about the challenges. Fame brought scrutiny, pressure, and personal struggles that were difficult to navigate. She acknowledges the toll it took on their relationship, from disagreements over career decisions to the difficulties of balancing public expectation with private desire. In her words, John was a brilliant, sensitive soul, but he was also human, imperfect, sometimes restless, and often caught between his passion for music and his commitment to family. Annie's reflections reveal that love in the shadow of fame is never simple. It is a delicate dance of compromise, understanding, and resilience. Breaking her silence after so many years is not an act of bitterness, Annie emphasizes, but an act of love and remembrance. She wishes to honor John not only as a music icon but as the man she knew intimately. Through her storytelling, fans are granted access to the private life behind the public legend, learning about the depth of their connection, the sacrifices made, and the joy and sorrow intertwined in their years together. Even now, Annie reflects on the lessons she learned alongside John. She speaks of patience, the importance of cherishing small moments, and the enduring strength that comes from facing life's challenges together. Her narrative is both a tribute and a testament, a way to preserve memory, convey truth, and offer a fuller picture of a love story that captivated no one more than the woman who lived it. For fans, Annie's revelations are a reminder that even the most iconic figures are human, shaped by love, struggle, and relationships that exist beyond the spotlight. At 78, she offers her voice, her perspective, and her memories, allowing the world to see John Denver not only as the musical legend they idolized, but as the husband and man she loved. Imperfections and all, through Annie's eyes, the story of John Denver becomes more than a tale of fame and music. It becomes a story of intimacy, vulnerability, and the enduring power of love, reminding us that behind every public icon, there exists a private world full of depth, emotion, and humanity. Annie Denver remembers the beginning as if it were yesterday, a whirlwind of youth, music, and possibility when she and John first crossed paths long before the world knew his name. In those early days, John was not yet a household figure, not yet the golden voice who would fill stadiums and dominate the charts. He was simply a dreamer with a guitar slung over his shoulder and a hunger to make music that meant something. Annie recalls meeting him at a small gathering of friends, where John sat quietly in a corner playing soft melodies that drifted across the room. She was immediately struck by his gentleness, his humility, and the spark in his eyes when he talked about songwriting. Their connection felt instantaneous and effortless, as though fate had pulled two souls into alignment. Annie describes those first conversations, how they spoke about art, family, and their hopes for the future, unaware that their lives were about to become forever intertwined. Their early relationship was built on simplicity, long walks through parks, sharing inexpensive meals, discovering new music together, and spending quiet, laughter-filled nights dreaming about the future. Annie remembers how John would scribble lyrics on whatever paper he could find, receipts, napkins, even the backs of envelopes, and then excitedly read them aloud to her, asking if the words carried emotion. She became not just a listener, but a muse. John drew inspiration from her kindness, her steady presence, and the unwavering belief she showed him even when the world hadn't yet caught on to his talent. Annie recalls sitting on the couch, barefoot, listening as he composed Annie's song, a love letter set to music that would soon become a global anthem. She says it felt surreal knowing that a piece of her heart had been woven into a song that millions would someday sing, but success did not fall from the sky. It came with sacrifice, long hours, and waves of uncertainty. Annie remembers the early struggles, the financial instability, the endless travel, and the feeling that every step forward required them to push through another barrier. John chased every opportunity, from small gigs in smoky bars to waiting hours for a chance at studio time. Annie supported him endlessly, juggling work and household responsibilities, believing in his future even when it seemed naive to others. She remembers nights when John returned home exhausted, guitars slung over tired shoulders, yet still writing into the early morning because the music simply wouldn't let him sleep. Their love was tested by ambition, but those tests only strengthened their devotion. Then came fame. Almost overnight, the world discovered John Denver. His voice began soaring across radio stations, and suddenly he wasn't just her husband, he was a star. Annie remembers watching his rise with equal parts pride and fear. She loved seeing him succeed, loved watching audiences fall in love with the man she had known long before the spotlight touched him. But fame came with a price. Their quiet dinners turned into rushed airport goodbyes. Their weekends vanished beneath concert schedules, press interviews, and promotional tours. John tried to stay grounded, Annie says, but the world demanded pieces of him faster than he could keep up. She began to feel the distance stretch not between love, but between time and togetherness. Still, Annie treasures the memory of the moments they stole back for themselves. There were mountain picnics, late-night dances in the kitchen, handwritten notes tucked into luggage, and gentle reassurances whispered through exhaustion. She remembers how John would look at her with gratitude and call her his anchor, insisting that without her there would be no music, no inspiration, and no meaning behind the success. Annie describes how deeply she believed in their ability to weather anything together. But success can reshape the world around a marriage, and Annie admits that changes began quietly. New faces appeared, producers, promoters, managers, interviewers, and each one wanted a different version of John Denver. Annie struggled watching the weight of fame settle onto his shoulders. She recalls moments when he questioned whether he was becoming more image than man. She held him through tears of frustration, reminding him that his worth was not defined by numbers, charts, or applause. Their early years taught. Annie remembers waking up alone more often than not, the other side of the bed cold from nights spent apart. She would listen to interviews on the radio, hearing him speak to the world with charm and confidence, yet silently wondering when she became just another voice competing for his time. The separation wasn't emotional at first, it was physical. Created by miles and deadlines, but distance has a way of rearranging hearts, shaping memories, and planting doubts. Annie describes this phase as the beginning of a quiet storm, one that arrived not with thunder, but with silence. As John Denver's fame skyrocketed, his world became louder. Fans surrounded him everywhere, shouting his name, reaching for photographs, begging for autographs. Fame had once felt like a victory, but to Annie it began to feel like a wall. She recalls evenings when he would come home overwhelmed, drained from being touched, talked to, demanded from, yet still expected to be present, loving, and attentive. She tried to understand, tried to carry his exhaustion alongside her own loneliness, but the imbalance grew heavier. Annie had gone from being his muse to being an observer, someone watching the man she loved sprint through life without breath. Without pause, without room to touch the ground. She admits there were moments of frustration. Arguments emerged, not loud and explosive, but tired and emotional. John wanted Annie to travel more with him, but she longed for routine, stability, and the home they had built together. When she stayed behind, people whispered. When she traveled, she vanished into the background. Annie says the world saw perfection, but behind closed doors, they struggled to hold on to the tenderness that once defined them. Fame, she realized, does not destroy love in one devastating blow. It steals tiny pieces moment by moment, until lovers wake up and notice the distance has become too vast to cross. Annie reflects on John's inner battles, ones the public rarely saw. She remembers nights when he questioned his identity. Was he a husband or a headline? A man or a machine built for performance? He wanted to make everyone happy. The fans who worshipped him, the industry that demanded him, and the wife who stood waiting with open arms. Annie felt torn between sympathy and heartbreak. She watched him struggle to be everything to everyone and, in trying to succeed, lose himself piece by piece. She now admits that she didn't know how to save him without losing herself. Their marriage began to show cracks in small ways. Missed anniversaries, forgotten conversations, messages unanswered, promises delayed. Annie remembers dinners going cold on the table, the sound of footsteps arriving long after midnight, and the defeated look in John's eyes when he realized what he was sacrificing. They loved each other deeply, but love alone was not enough to silence the world that demanded his attention. She confesses it felt like they were trapped between two versions of reality, the one they had lived together before fame, and the one fame forced upon them. Then came the rumor stories from tabloids linking John to strangers. Public speculation about affairs, whispers about addictions and personal struggles. Annie says she tried to block it all out, but fame has a cruel way of flooding innocent hearts with doubt. She trusted him, but trust became harder when life itself felt unstable. Arguments grew sharper. Silence lasted longer. Their home, once full of music, began to echo with absence. Annie remembers crying quietly in bathrooms, not wanting John to carry more guilt, while he carried unspoken emotions she could never fully reach. Looking back at 78, Annie doesn't blame him. She doesn't blame herself either. She says they were two people caught in a storm far bigger than either expected. They loved fiercely, but fame demanded a price neither one knew how to pay. She believes John struggled with emotions he didn't know how to share: fear, exhaustion, confusion, and she struggled to understand without losing her own identity. Their love never disappeared. It simply became overshadowed by the life surrounding it. Today, Annie speaks of those years with tenderness rather than regret. She remembers the laughter more than the arguments, the music more than the silence, the love more than the pain. She believes their marriage ended not because they stopped caring, but because they loved each other enough to let go rather than hold on to something breaking. Annie hopes fans understand that behind every love story, there is a human story, one filled with flaws, choices, and consequences time cannot reverse. And though she and John eventually walk separate paths, she still carries gratitude for the years they were blessed to share. Annie. Denver remembers the day their marriage officially ended with striking clarity, not because of anger, but because of the quiet acceptance that filled the room. There were no dramatic scenes, no accusations, no slammed doors. Instead, they faced one another with the painful understanding that love, even when real, doesn't always survive the weight of fame and personal evolution. Annie says she looked into John's eyes and saw the same softness she fell in love with years before. Yet she also saw exhaustion, confusion, and a longing for something neither of them could describe. Signing those papers felt like closing a that had once held every shade of happiness. She walked out of the courthouse and felt wind brush across her face, whispering memories from a life that would forever live inside her. Even as she tried to walk away, life after separation was disorienting. Annie struggled with the absence of routines that once shaped her days, the sound of John tuning his guitar in the evenings, the late-night coffee they'd share while reading letters from fans, the small domestic rituals that made a house feel like home. She found herself lingering in old rooms, touching the backs of chairs, opening drawers filled with keepsakes she wasn't ready to discard. She had loved a man the world claimed, and letting go meant unlearning the presence of someone who seemed stitched into the very fabric of her identity. Meanwhile, John continued to soar through the music world, though fame no longer brought the same glow. Annie watched from afar, noticing a heaviness that accompanied his public image. Behind interviews, she could sometimes detect a quiet sadness in his voice, proof that endings, even necessary ones, leave scars. Though divorced, they never despised one another. Annie never spoke ill of him. She respected his humanity, admired his work ethic, and understood the pressures that shaped him. Their connection altered form, but it did not vanish. Friends who kept in contact told her John referred to her with tenderness. Speaking of their marriage as something sacred rather than failed, Annie built a new life. One focused on healing and rediscovering who she was beyond the spotlight. She explored her own passions, reconnecting with art, nature, and the peace she once longed for during their hectic marriage. Yet, she admits there were nights she lay awake, wondering if things could have been different. What if they had met later in life? What if fame had arrived slower? What if the world had given them more room to breathe? Those thoughts weren't regrets, they were reflections. Small ghosts that surfaced quietly and faded at dawn. When John remarried and continued searching for happiness, Annie genuinely wished him well. She knew he carried emotional storms within him, storms fame magnified. She hoped someone would love him with the same tenderness she once did. Though they were no longer together, she still felt protective of the man behind the songs, the man she had once held during his most fragile moments. Love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it simply changes shape. Then, in 1997, tragedy struck. John Denver's plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean, silencing a voice that had shaped music history and generations of hearts. Annie remembers hearing the news and collapsing into a chair, frozen between disbelief and grief. Even though they had lived separate lives for years, the loss felt personal, sharp, and unnerving. Memories flooded her, his laughter echoing in mountain air, the way his fingers danced across guitar strings, the late-night conversations about dreams he hadn't yet chased. She had lost not just a public figure, but of her own soul. In the days that followed, the world mourned him openly. Fans lit candles, sang his songs, and shared stories of how his music carried them through heartbreak, childhood, and transformation. Annie grieved in silence. She attended no press interviews, made no dramatic public statements. Instead, she retreated into her memories, replaying the early days when they were just two young dreamers, holding hands and believing they could touch the stars together. Now, at 78, Annie speaks of John with warmth rather than tears. She talks about their shared past with a steadiness earned through time. She remembers his charisma, his tenderness, and the complicated man behind fame, a man filled with love and flaws, brilliance and struggle. She speaks of their marriage not as a failure, but as a love story that served its purpose, shaping both of their lives in ways nothing else could. Annie says she broke her silence not to reopen old wounds, but to honor truth, to remind the world that behind the legend was a real person. And behind that person was a woman who loved him deeply, She believes John Denver's legacy is more than music. It is the message of connection, nature, reflection, and the courage to feel. She carries that legacy in her heart, the way one carries a song long after the final note fades. And as she looks back on her life, Annie knows the love they shared did not end with divorce or death. It lives in memory, in melody, and in the quiet spaces between her sentences where emotion lingers long.